You have no idea who you're dealing with, Mr. Carter. Her voice crackled over the phone, low and sharp, like the edge of broken glass. I didn't answer. In my world, silence is a weapon. Let them get nervous. Let them talk. We will bury you in legal fees, she said finally. You'll lose everything, and when it's over, you'll wish you had just taken our offer. I could see her in my mind, perfect posture, designer sunglasses, thinking she was the smartest person in the room. No, Linda, I said, slow enough to make every word land. When this is over, you'll be the one wishing. I hung up. And that's where my story begins. I might hold the world record for the most expensive act of revenge against a homeowners association. They took my land. I took their $12 million waterfront mansions. And I did it all without breaking a single law. My name's Daniel Carter. I'm a forensic accountant, which means I spend my days hunting down money trails, corporate fraud, shell companies, hidden accounts, the kind of stuff most folks would rather not think about. I'm good at it, very good. The kind of good that makes enemies nervous. But the fight that changed my life didn't start in a boardroom or a courtroom. It started here, on the rocky shoreline of Lake Westfield, the land my family had called home for over a century and a half. My property wasn't just dirt and water, it was history. My grandfather built the first wooden pier here in 1912. My father taught me how to fish off the East Dock when I was 5. There's an old boathouse near the cove that still smells of cedar and machine oil. Every inch of it carried the weight of memory. I wasn't naive. I knew what waterfront property meant to developers. I'd seen enough luxury projects swallow whole stretches of shoreline in my lifetime. But I believed the old boundaries still meant something. I believed wrong. The trouble started small, the kind of small that pretends to be harmless. One morning, I found the gate to my dock padlocked shut, with a bright orange sign from the county claiming, "Unsafe structure, access prohibited." Someone had filed a safety complaint. A week later, tire tracks appeared across the meadow near my western fence. They led straight from the private marina of Harbor Point Estates. My newest neighbors, a gated community of glass and stone mansions, lined up like trophies along the water. Harbor Point was the crown jewel of a developer called Mariner Developments, a name I would come to know far too well. It was run with military precision by its homeowners association. They had rules for everything: the height of hedges, the color of kayak racks, even how long you could keep a boat out of the water in winter. And at the center of it all was Linda Graves, HOA president, socialite, self-appointed guardian of Harbor Point's image. I met her for the first time when she showed up uninvited on my shoreline one crisp September morning. She stood there, arms folded, looking past me toward the trees. "These oaks," she said, pointing toward a line of giants that had stood since before my grandfather was born. "They block the lake view from several of our residences. You really should consider having them removed." I laughed, not kindly. "Lady, those trees have been here longer than your entire neighborhood." Her smile was tight, brittle. "Sometimes progress means letting go of the past, Mr. Carter." I didn't answer. She took my silence for weakness. A month later, the beige envelope showed up. It was taped to the door of my boathouse, flapping in the wind off the lake. Inside was the kind of legal language designed to make your head spin. A county notice declaring my property abandoned and transferring ownership to Harbor Point Estates. They had already sold it to Mariner Developments for their Phase 2 expansion, waterfront mansions, private marina extension, projected sales north of $200 million. And just like that, they thought they'd erased me. They had no idea the storm they'd just unleashed. Lake Westfield doesn't forgive the careless. The shoreline curves like an old scar, full of inlets and hidden shallows where you can run a prop clean off if you're not paying attention. I grew up learning every twist of it: the sound the water makes when the wind turns, the smell before a summer storm. Out here, you don't just own land. You belong to it. That's why, when I inherited the property after my parents passed, I didn't think of it in terms of acreage or dollar signs. It was my anchor, my quiet. My proof that not everything in the world had to be paved over or developed. The house I lived in wasn't much to look at compared to the glass palaces of Harbor Point. 2 stories, cedar siding, weathered silver by decades of sun and rain, a wraparound porch where I could drink my coffee and watch the mist crawl over the water in the morning. Some folks can't stand that kind of stillness. They need noise, traffic, neighbors, the constant hum of things happening. Me? I preferred the rhythm of the lake, the creak of dock lines in the wind, the splash of a bass breaking the surface. That rhythm started breaking the day Harbor Point Estates opened its gates. At first, I only heard about them through the papers. The premier lakeside community, all capital letters, all gloss. 100 acres of what used to be hardwood forest had been scraped clean for driveways and tennis courts. Private docks stretched out like fingers into the lake. I didn't like it, but I figured it wasn't my business. Then came the first letter. It arrived in a crisp white envelope with the HOA logo embossed on the flap. Inside was a neighborly reminder that my shoreline lacked proper erosion control and could pose a visual detraction from the lake's aesthetic. Visual detraction. That was a new one for me. I ignored it. That's when the little game started. Someone reported my boathouse to the county as structurally unsound. The inspector who showed up looked embarrassed to be there. The building passed with no issue, but a week later, a fresh unsafe structure notice was nailed to the dock gate. Then came the lawn service mix-up. A polite young crew showed up, sent by the HOA, to trim the shoreline vegetation. When I told them they were trespassing, they apologized, packed up, and drove off, straight toward the Harbor Point Gatehouse. Linda Graves herself started making appearances, always unannounced, always dressed like she'd just stepped out of a country club ad, pastel sweater draped over her shoulders, sunglasses big enough to hide half her face. Once I caught her standing on my dock, staring down the shoreline through a pair of binoculars. "You're on private property," I told her. She lowered the binoculars, smiled that brittle smile. "So are you, Mr. Carter." "This dock violates county setback ordinances." "It's been here since 1912, I said. "Your ordinance wasn't even a thought back then." "That may be," she said, turning to leave, "but times change. You should consider keeping up." It wasn't what she said that stuck with me. It was the way she said it, like someone delivering a warning they were certain you wouldn't take seriously. By the time the beige envelope showed up, the one taped to my boathouse door, I'd learned enough about Harbor Point's ways to know it wasn't a mistake. The language was cold and clinical. Abandoned property, public nuisance, transfer of ownership to Harbor Point Estates, to be sold to Mariner Developments. Below that, in smaller print, was the projected use. Phase 2 waterfront expansion, private marina upgrade, new luxury villas with infinity pools. Starting at $12 million each. They weren't just after a slice of my land, they wanted it all. The shoreline, the coves, the history. I stood there on the dock, wind off the lake snapping at the paper in my hand, and felt something settle in my chest. Not rage, not panic. Something colder. Because if there's one thing I've learned from years of chasing down fraud and corporate theft, it's that the people who think they're untouchable are always wrong. And Harbor Point was about to find that out the hard way. You can tell a lot about a person by how they run a meeting. Linda Graves didn't run meetings. She staged performances. 2 weeks before that beige envelope showed up, I'd gotten wind that the Harbor Point HOA was holding their quarterly board session in the community hall. It was supposed to be open to residents and concerned parties, though I'm pretty sure I didn't fit the definition of either. Still, I walked in. The hall looked more like a boutique hotel lobby than anything else. Polished hardwood floors, panoramic windows looking out over the marina, rows of white folding chairs arranged with military precision. At the front was a long table draped in a navy cloth with the Harbor Point logo printed in gold. Linda sat in the center like a monarch presiding over her court. To her right was her husband, Mark, HOA treasurer, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. To her left, a row of board members in crisp polos, each with a name placard in front of them. She wore cream slacks, a silk blouse, and that same brittle smile she'd given me on the dock. Her hair was perfect, the kind of perfect that takes a small army and a lot of hairspray. The meeting started with what you'd expect. Landscaping budgets, security patrol reports, a long, tedious debate about whether paddleboards should be allowed to dry on docks overnight. Then she saw me. Her smile didn't falter. but her voice picked up a new edge. "We have an outside guest joining us this evening," she said, looking right at me. "Mr. Carter, would you like to explain your presence here?" "I'm here because your association seems awfully interested in my property," I said, my voice carried in the quiet room. "And I thought it might be polite to hear why, directly from you." A murmur ran through the crowd. Linda leaned back in her chair, folding her hands. "Your land, Mr. Carter, is an unfortunate eyesore on what is otherwise a pristine shoreline. Our community has certain standards to maintain property values. My property value's just fine without your help." A few people in the back snickered. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "It's also a safety concern. Overgrown vegetation, derelict structures." "You mean the 110-year-old boathouse? The one that's been inspected and cleared twice this year?" She didn't answer. Instead, she shifted gears. "Mr. Carter, no one here wishes to create conflict, but progress is inevitable. Sometimes we have to make room for what benefits the majority." "That's the thing about land," I said, keeping my tone calm. "It's not up for a popularity vote." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Linda finally smiled again, that same smile that says you'll regret this later, and tapped her gavel. "Let's move on." But I'd already seen what I needed to see. The rest of the meeting was a masterclass in control. Linda dictated the pace, shut down questions she didn't like, and made a point of rewarding her loyalists with approving nods. It wasn't governance, it was theater. And she was the star. When the session ended, I waited until the crowd thinned. She was gathering her papers when I stepped up to the table. "You enjoy this," I said quietly. Her eyes flicked up to mine. "Enjoy what?" "Power. Telling people what they can and can't do. Making the rules." She tilted her head, just slightly. "Power is just influence, Mr. Carter, and influence is only useful if you know how to keep it." I smiled. "Good. I'm glad you know how much you've got. Makes it all the more satisfying when it's gone." For the first time that night, her smile slipped, just for a heartbeat, before snapping back in place. As I walked out of that hall, I knew two things. One, Linda Graves wasn't just a busybody with a title. She was a calculated operator with a network, resources, and a willingness to play dirty. Two, I'd just told her, to her face, that I was coming for her. And from the look in her eyes, she'd taken the hint. It was a Thursday morning, the kind where the lake looks like glass and even the gulls seem to sleep in. I'd been out early, walking the property line with a mug of coffee, checking the fences before winter really set in. The air had that sharp, metallic bite that says snow isn't far off. That's when I saw it, a single beige envelope, taped dead center to the boathouse door. The wind coming off the lake made it flutter against the wood, a soft slap, slap, slap that somehow sounded louder than it should. No return address, no polite, "Please contact our office." Just my name, typed in block letters. I pulled it free, feeling the brittle crunch of cheap tape under my fingers, and slid out the contents. The letter inside was printed on county letterhead, but the phrasing, that was pure Harbor Point. This notice serves as official recognition that the property at Parcel 11B06, described as approximately 200 acres of waterfront and adjoining land, has been determined to be abandoned and in violation of county maintenance and safety ordinances. Effective immediately, ownership has been transferred to Harbor Point Estates for the purposes of Phase 2 development. All existing structures will be demolished. All personal effects will be removed or destroyed. I read it twice. The words didn't get any softer the second time. Abandoned, violation, transferred. It was legalese, sure, but I'd been in the game long enough to recognize when a document wasn't just written to inform you. It was written to end you. I walked down to the dock, envelope in hand, and stared across the water toward Harbor Point. From this angle, their waterfront looked like something out of a glossy magazine, massive glass panels catching the morning sun, white decks stacked with boats that cost more than most people's houses. But I knew the truth. Behind those walls was a group of people who thought my land was just a blank space on their expansion map. And at the top of that list, Linda Graves. I could see her in my mind's eye, probably sipping her imported coffee, telling the board how simple it had been. One county contact, One strategically placed complaint, one rubber stamp, and poof, my family's legacy was theirs to sell. The paper crumpled in my fist without me realizing it. I'd handled corporate fraud cases worth hundreds of millions. I'd chased dirty money across borders, cracked shell corporations wide open, and watched men in 5,000 suits leave court in handcuffs. But this was different. This wasn't about numbers on a spreadsheet. This was about home. My father's voice teaching me how to mend a fishing net. My mother planting wildflowers along the slope to the cove. Summers where the lake water was so warm, you could swim until midnight and still not want to leave. They thought they could erase all that with one envelope. I smoothed the paper out again, slid it back into its beige shroud, and tucked it inside my jacket. That's when the cold feeling hit me. Not fear, not shock, but that heavy, steady calm that comes when you stop reacting and start planning. Because the thing about people like Linda Graves is, they never imagine the other side might fight back. And they certainly don't imagine the other side might be better at their own game than they are. I turned back toward the house, the crunch of frost under my boots sounding almost like a countdown. This wasn't going to be a shouting match over property lines. This wasn't going to be a polite courtroom disagreement. No, this was going to be a war. And when it was over, the Harbor Point HOA wouldn't just lose. They'd lose in a way they'd never forget. War doesn't start with bullets. It starts with information. By the time I got back to the house, I already had the outline of a plan forming in my head. Step 1. Find out exactly how they pulled this stunt, and who helped them do it. I keep my office in what used to be my father's tackle room. The scent of cedar still lingers in the walls, mixed with the faint tang of machine oil. Against one wall sits my old workstation. 3 monitors, custom-built tower, hard drives stacked like bricks. Most folks who meet me think I'm just some quiet guy who likes fishing. They don't realize I've spent years in corporate investigations, and I never retired those skills. First stop, the county's online property records. Parcel 11B06, my land, had been transferred 3 days earlier. The authorizing signature, a county zoning clerk named Mitchell Ross. I didn't know him personally, but his name popped up in a few Harbor Point meeting minutes I'd pulled from their public site last year. That was interesting. The transfer cited chronic ordinance violations as justification, which meant there had to be a complaint file somewhere. I filed an official request with the county records office. No reason to hide my name yet. Paper trails cut both ways. While I waited, I started pulling on another thread. HOA budgets are public for tax purposes, and I knew exactly where to look. Within an hour, I had their last 3 years of financial statements on my desk. I brewed another pot of coffee and started reading line by line. It didn't take long before I saw it. Security consulting, $482,000, a massive jump from the previous year's $70,000. Even for a wealthy community, that was a glaring red flag. And right below that, community relations, $316,000. The kind of vague category that can hide just about anything. I leaned back in my chair, tapping a pen against my lip. The money was moving somewhere it shouldn't. I just needed to figure out where. The next day, I drove into town. Small towns have their own kind of network. People talk, but only if they trust you. My first stop was a diner on Main Street. The kind of place with cracked leather booths and coffee that could strip paint. That's where I ran into Jimmy, an old friend from high school who now worked as a part-time contractor for, you guessed it, Harbor Point Estates. After a bit of catching up, I steered the conversation toward the HOA. Jimmy rolled his eyes. You wouldn't believe the nonsense they pull. Linda's got that place wrapped around her little finger. They even had me redo landscaping on a lot they don't technically own yet. Said it was preparing for future development. What lot? I asked, keeping my voice casual. Down by the South Cove. Big chunk of land. Belongs to some stubborn guy who won't sell. You might know him. I smiled thinly. Yeah, I might. By the end of lunch, Jimmy had let slip that Linda met regularly with a consultant named Evan Kessler, a former real estate attorney who had been disbarred 5 years ago for shady transfers and forged easements. If he was involved, that explained a lot. That night, I pulled everything I could find on Kessler. Bankruptcy filings, disciplinary board reports, old cases where his name showed up in the footnotes, and, jackpot, A recent